Is the man they call Juice ready to take on a bigger role to power the Kings next season? We discuss that and more on this edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love you to leave us a positive comment on Apple Podcasts if you're a fan of the show. And we are on YouTube. Please like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years, 20 plus years at the Fox Sports Radio Network, also co-host of the Puck Podcast, a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the past 17 years, and a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Well, now that the LA Kings have figured out who their next head coach is, and yes, they still have an assistant coaching position to fill, it is on to the business of contract negotiations and getting ready for the NHL draft, which is coming up at the end of April 28th and 29th to be exact, in Las Vegas, the Sphere in Vegas, which is really cool. We have lots of draft talk to get to, and we'll do that the closer we get to the draft. We'll have a special guest or two to help us navigate what the Kings might do with their first round pick. They have the 21st pick in the first round, unless they trade it, of course. We are going to talk about the selections coming up for the LA Kings. Again, closer to the draft, but it's something to keep on your radar. Now, the Kings are in position to possibly get a very good player. We're going to talk about a player that was the 29th pick in the first round of the draft a few years back, coming up in just a bit. But as far as the draft picks for the LA Kings, if you want to look ahead, the Kings do have a first-round pick, the 21st overall pick in this year's draft. Now, the Kings do not have a second-round pick. That went to the Philadelphia Flyers to have them take Cal Peterson's contract off our hands. The Kings do not have a third-round pick. That went to the Columbus Blue Jackets for them to take Jonathan Quick off our hands. The Kings do not have a fifth-round selection. That also went to the Flyers in the Brendan Lemieux trade for Zach McEwen. But after that first-round pick, the Kings have a fourth-round pick and a sixth and a seventh-round pick. So likely all the attention going to be paid to that first-round pick. The Kings have done a pretty decent job of finding some diamonds in the rough here and there. But the Kings do have that first-round pick, 21st overall. And there's the potential there to get a decent player. We shall see what direction they go into. Probably best possible player. But again, all that we'll talk a lot more about in the coming weeks. As for some signings for the LA Kings to this point, we've seen some minor deals. Now, the most notable, the Kings did re-sign backup goalie David Riddick, who was an unrestricted free agent. He gets a one-year deal worth $1 million. Now, there have been a few other signings so far for the Kings. A couple of prospects, Atu Yemsen and Caleb Lawrence, were signed to entry-level deals. And then you had a couple of re-signings of some Ontario Reign depth players like Joe Hicketts and Taylor Ward. Yemsen and Lawrence got entry-level deals, and Hicketts and Ward were one-year deals. As for the work to be done, though, for the LA Kings, that was some light lifting. There's a lot of heavy lifting yet to be done. The Kings have, just to recap, the Kings have 10 restricted free agents of note and 6 unrestricted free agents of note. Now, if you don't know an unrestricted free agent, and we've got all kinds of different people who listen to this show. Some of you are very well versed in all this kind of stuff, know how much cap space the Kings have, all that kind of stuff. And some of you are very casual when it comes to that kind of a thing. But for those that maybe don't know, unrestricted free agent is a player that has played out the remaining years on his contract and now is eligible to sign with any team wherever he wants to go. Of course, that could include his old team as well, but he's completely unrestricted, free to go wherever he wants. Restricted free agents, however, those are players that have played out their entry-level contract, but they don't have enough years played to be able to become an unrestricted free agent. So teams have to make qualifying offers on those restricted free agents If they don't decide to do that, then those players do become unrestricted free agents. Now, if they do sign those players to qualifying offers and that player has arbitration rights and the player doesn't like the deal he's offered, he can go to arbitration to have it settled by a third party. As for the Kings' restricted free agents, there are forwards Quentin Byfield, Blake Lizotte, Carl Grundstrom, Arthur Kaliev, Alex Turcotte, Akil Thomas, Samuel Fagemo, Tyler Madden, Andre Lee. You've got defenseman Jordan Spence and goalies Eric Portillo and Jacob Ingham. Of that group, Grundstrom, Lizotte, Thomas, Fagemo, Madden, and Lee are arbitration eligible. The rest are not. Of the group that I believe are the priorities for the Kings as far as the restricted free agents, there's clearly two, Quentin Byfield and Jordan Spence. Neither of them have arbitration rights. Both are going to be signed without question. The question, though, is, especially with Byfield, will he get a bridge deal or a long-term deal? Now, what is a bridge deal? A bridge deal is a shorter contract that would get him signed for next season. And then after that, they would sign him to a longer-term deal that would kick in after this year, because after this year, the Kings have more salary cap space potentially. So the bridge deal is just kind of, okay, this is for now, but we are going to take care of you with a long-term deal. Or the Kings could go ahead and just do it right now if they feel like they can have the cap space and Quentin Byfield wants to do that. Then if they can, they'll do it now. If not, if they feel like they can't give him the deal he wants, or if he can't get the deal he's looking for, then they would do some sort of a bridge deal to get him to that area where they could sign him to the long-term deal. But those are the two, not only the two priorities for restricted free agents, but the two priorities for free agents, period, for the LA Kings, in my opinion. And they'll definitely get those done. But exactly, will it be the bridge deal? Will it be the long-term deal? That remains to be seen. As for the unrestricted free agents, the guys that can go anywhere they want, that would be defenseman Matt Roy, forwards Victor Arvidsson and Trevor Lewis, goalies Cam Talbot and Phoenix Copley. And I did want to throw in there also Ontario Reign veteran captain TJ Tynan. The restricted free agents will likely be signed first because there's no negotiating that really has to go on unless they go to arbitration. That could play things out. But the unrestricted free agents obviously would take longer to figure out because there's negotiation that's going on. Maybe the Kings send them an offer. Then they play that offer off against other teams. They'll say, oh, well, the Kings are offering me this. Or, Matt Roy says, oh, this team X, LA, they're offering me this. I'd love to stay. Can you match it? That kind of thing. So that can certainly go on and draw that out. So the unrestricted free agents likely will be signed after the restricted free agents. There's also the situation with Phoenix Copley. He is an unrestricted free agent, but he's also coming off a knee injury that saw him miss all of last season. So obviously not only the Kings, but anyone else who might be interested in him wants to wait and see what's the recovery process like for him before they would sign him to a possible deal, or for the Kings to re-sign him to a deal. Obviously, LA probably has the leg up. I would assume it's an interesting question. Maybe we'll have to ask our guest tomorrow about this if he knows. But when you're an unrestricted free agent, are you still eligible to receive rehab and treatment from the team that you were on when you were injured? I would assume so, but I'm not 100% sure how that works. The free agency signing period will come up on July the 1st after the NHL draft. How much are the Kings looking to add by signing someone else's unrestricted free agents? It obviously depends on who is and who isn't coming back for the LA Kings next year and how much salary cap space the Kings have. Will LA be looking to make some sort of a big splash in free agency? I seriously doubt it. It's more likely that because of their cap situation, they'll be looking to make some minor additions, specifically maybe for some role players. But even that may not be the case because Rob Blake and company have said they're looking for some of the players within the organization to take on a bigger role. So some of those spots that may be opening up might be filled by players that we already know about that are in the organization. And if you're thinking, what about a goalie? Looking at the names available as far as unrestricted free agent goalies, the best available is Cam Talbot. Otherwise, you're looking at names like Matt Murray, Ilya Samsonov, Pavel Francouz, Capo Kakinen. Now, all those guys are younger than Cam Talbot, but none of them had the season this past year that Cam Talbot had. We've seen the Kings stick with their GM. We've seen them remove the interim tag from their coach. I would not be surprised if they decide to stick with last year's number one goalie for another season. I can't imagine it would be more than a 1-year deal for Cam Talbot. He is going to turn 37, other than Marc-Andre Fleury. And even Marc-Andre Fleury in Minnesota, I think is sharing time in net. Cam Talbot would be the oldest number one goalie for any team in the league, much less a team that has plans on being in the playoffs again. I can't see another team offering him a multi-year deal. Maybe he could get more money on a 1-year deal from other teams than the Kings. But then again, that would likely be as a backup for a contending team. I don't know that there are any other playoff teams off the top of my head that are looking for a number one goalie for just kind of a year and would be willing maybe to go in on Cam Talbot. So I think he might be the best option for the Kings unless there's a trade. And I think for Cam Talbot, the Kings are probably his best option as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw Cam Talbot back for another year. So that's a little bit of an overall view of what the Kings are looking to do this offseason, who they're looking to sign. Again, we got the draft coming up, free agency after that. So lots more to talk about with the Kings, but wanted to give you kind of a broad overview of what the Kings are kind of looking at this offseason. Adrian Kempe is a part of the Kings' present and future. We're going to talk about his past season and what role he could have for the coming season under new head coach Jim Hiller. That's next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets to NBA, NHL, or whatever sport you're into. They have bought tickets, or I have bought tickets using Game Time to NFL and NHL games recently, and I'm a very satisfied customer. The app is super easy to use and navigate. You just go on, tap on the listings. They've got music, sports, shows, and a list of tickets with all the best deals. When you search for your tickets, those searches are saved, so every time you go on the app, you can check right back on your recent searches and see if those prices have gone up or down or how many tickets are available. My favorite feature is getting the panoramic view from the seat that you want to buy. You see the exact view you're going to get if you buy that seat. And you can get the lowest price guaranteed, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. As we look ahead and look back as well at players that are going to be key, important pieces for the LA Kings coming up again this season, we did want to take a look at another key player. We've talked about Anze Kopitar. We've talked about Drew Doughty. And right now we're going to talk about the man they call Juice. That would be Kings forward Adrian Kempe. The 27-year-old winger is signed for the next 2 seasons at a very team-friendly price of $5.5 million per year. He's played his entire career, parts of 8 seasons in the NHL, all in Los Angeles. He was a former first-round pick, 29th overall in 2014. So mentioned earlier, the Kings have the 21st pick in this year's draft. It is possible, with a little luck and some hard work, you can find a difference maker type of player later on in the first round of the draft. As for Kempe, he posted career highs in points this past season with 75. That was 8 more than he had the previous season, which had been his career high. He also had career highs in assists with 47. That was 20 more than he had the previous season, which was his previous career high. Now, he did sacrifice some of his goals to be a bit more of a playmaker. He went from 41 goals 2 seasons ago to 28 goals last season. I think he is a very underrated defensive player. I think he is the Kings' best pure goal scorer on the team. I think he's the Kings' best finisher on the team as far as how he finishes around the net, what he does on breakaways. He has great hands, he has great speed, and he's a very smart player. Adrian Kempe also has a bit of a swagger to him, and he is not shy about having fun, celebrating those goals, putting the hand up to his ear, pumping his fists. He's not afraid to have contact. He's not afraid to mix it up after the whistle if called for. Certainly not a big physical player, but he doesn't shy away from it either. He has been one of the Kings' top line forwards now for the past couple of years, along with Adrien Kempe. And while it's hard to project lines at this point because we just don't know what players are going to be back or not, most likely the one line you could see that isn't going to be changed from last season, if you were going to bet on it, it would be the top line of Kempe, Kopitar, and Quinton Byfield. Now, with a new head coach in Jim Hiller looking to put his stamp on the team, who knows? Maybe there are no lines that are the same from a season ago. It depends on what Hiller wants to do. So that's obviously to be seen. But again, if there was one line you could see sticking together, it would be that Kings number one line. Now, Hiller and GM Rob Blake both talked about the Kings being more offensive while not sacrificing their identity of being a good defensive team. And it was Adrian Kempe, along with Kevin Fiala, who were the most notable players in their exit interviews who did openly talk about, and they weren't too strong on this, but they did say maybe it's time for a change. Maybe it's time to be a little more offensive minded. And to be fair, if there were two players that were going to talk about that, it would be Adrian Kempe and Kevin Fiala, because they're probably the two most dangerous offensive players on the team, and they like to score goals, and who doesn't? So we saw how dynamic Kevin Fiala could be at the World Championships. Kempe, I think, is equally there. He was at the World Championships as well, and he still was more of that playmaker role than he was the sniper, so to speak. But there's no question Adrien Kempe can still be that kind of a player. He has shown the ability, obviously, to be a 40-goal scorer, which he did 2 years ago. And I think with a more offensive game plan, he could very easily return to being a 40-goal scorer again. I think at least back into the 30s. I think one area that Kempe definitely did fall short in this past season was his production on the power play. That definitely needs to be better. Maybe with Jim Hiller now for a full season, that can be something that is worked on. Jim Hiller is known as a power play kind of specialist. That's why he was hired as a Kings assistant coach, was to come in and specifically work on that power play. For Kempe, he had 11 power play goals to lead the team 2 years ago, dropped off to just 5 last year. If he's even close, to those 11, he's obviously going to be scoring in the 30s this past season. So Adrien Kempe does need to be a bigger weapon on that power play. So hopefully Jim Hiller can figure out the best way to utilize him, and he can figure out a way to be more productive and be more of a finisher on some of his power play opportunities. There is no question that, for the Kings next season, Adrien Kempe should be and is going to be expected to be one of the key components for them to have success. Like I said, hopefully he can build on that career best 75 points that led the team in scoring. But there's no question, again, he is a key for the LA Kings. He's one of their top end talented players. For the Kings to go where they want to go, Adrien Kempe needs to have a stellar season like he had this past year. Maybe the goal numbers go up a little bit as well. Like we said, unless on the power play also, production goes up. And if that happens, Kempe will have another great season. And again, will be one of the keys for the LA Kings come next year. They're definitely going to be relying on him to be that kind of a player for him. Up next, a new GM was just hired in the NHL, and he would have been a great fit in LA. We'll speculate on that next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. It is playoff time, and in the NBA and the NHL, you've got a lot of great games going on. Unfortunately, the Kings aren't a part of it anymore, but still some great hockey action. NBA as well. Baseball is in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. Like I said, unfortunately, the Kings aren't around. Lakers and Clippers are long gone as well, but you can always go and bet on the teams that knocked them out of the playoffs, like the Oilers, who are now trailing in their series against Dallas. Go Stars. Or the Mavericks, who eliminated the Clippers, and the Mavericks are on the verge of going to the NBA Finals. Nobody saw that coming. Hey, Dodger fans, your team is in first place and one of the favorites to win it all. It is a great time of the year to be a sports fan, and it can be even better and more fun with FanDuel. You can bet on who's going to win, who's going to lose, and things like how many home runs Shohei Ohtani is going to hit this year. And you can do it all with FanDuel, what are you waiting for? Visit fanduel.com/locked-on, or you can also make your first bet an automatic win as well. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, there were plenty of head coaching vacancies that needed to be filled in the NHL. There was a lot of turnover when it came to the bench bosses. All of them have now been filled except one, and that would be the San Jose Sharks. Could it be Ontario Reign head coach Marco Sturm? We'll see. I did talk to our Locked On Sharks guy, JD Young, asked him if Todd McClellan's name has come up for a possible return to San Jose, where he is that franchise's all-time winningest coach. And he said the Sharks did reach out, but T-Mac apparently wasn't interested in another rebuild. So if true, that's interesting. Looks like McClellan won't be returning behind the bench for next season unless he's an in-season coaching hire. He did get interviewed by the Toronto Maple Leafs regarding their head coaching vacancy, but I guess Todd McClellan not looking to go back for a second turn with the San Jose Sharks. There was one GM vacancy, general manager, in the NHL, and that was recently filled. And the man who was hired, his name is Don Waddell, and he's now the new general manager of the Columbus Blue Jackets. If you don't know the name, he's been around a while, was the first ever GM of the Atlanta Thrashers. That didn't go so great. But his latest job as GM of the Carolina Hurricanes, well, that went really, really well. He built Carolina into a solid contending team. They reached the playoffs and they won at least one series in each of his 6 seasons on the job in Carolina. I was very surprised to hear the news of him leaving the Hurricanes. His contract was up at the end of the year. I'd assumed the Hurricanes would want him back. Why wouldn't they? And frankly, I was even more surprised when I found out that the 65-year-old Waddell decided to take on the tire fire that is the Columbus Blue Jackets. Now, maybe he was looking for one last challenge. Maybe they just offered him a boatload of money. Money talks, but I think he would have been a great hire in Los Angeles if the Kings had been looking for a new GM, which unfortunately they were not. As with the head coach, perhaps money was an issue here for the Kings in deciding not to get rid of the GM. Maybe Kings ownership wasn't all that keen on hiring another coach and another GM and decided that they would stick with it for one more year and then potentially make big changes if necessary. Although Jim Hiller signed a 3-year deal. So if he is going anywhere anytime soon, the Kings will still be on the hook to pay for it. And they're paying for Todd McClellan for next year as well, $5 million. So in LA, Waddell would have taken on a team that was maybe a bit more constricted with the salary cap. And the Kings do have a lack of draft picks. That's not the case in Columbus. They've got plenty of cap room. They got plenty of draft picks, but they're also a long way off from being any kind of a contender, where the LA Kings obviously have been a playoff team three straight years and certainly would look to be closer to winning a cup than the Columbus Blue Jackets. Had the opening been in LA for Don Waddell, it would have been very interesting to see if he would have been interested in the job and if the Kings would have considered it. Unfortunately, we'll never know, but that could have been a great hire for the LA Kings if they had been looking for a new GM. But obviously, as we know, that was not the case. For you everydayers, those of you that listen to watch Locked On LA Kings every day, coming up on Wednesday, LA Kings broadcaster and former player Daryl Evans is going to stop by, talk about the Kings offseason and some other things as well. And I did want to mention, Wednesdays have typically been our interview day, both in season and now in the off season. And we're looking to kind of continue that going forward. I kind of have some, set days for things. As Friday is the fan feedback show. Monday is the big, weekend recap. And then Wednesdays, usually we like to have a special guest. So that's going to continue forward in the off season. I did want to mention, if you ever have a question for any of our guests, I would love to get those questions. So if you have a question for Daryl Evans and you get it to me within about 24 hours, I'll ask him. The email address, as you probably know, is lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE. So again, for Daryl Evans or any other guest we ever have, when I promote, this person's going to come on the show on Wednesday. If you want to ask a question for that person, shoot off an email or post it on social media. You could send me a direct message on Instagram or on Twitter, X, whatever. So I'd love to make that a part of the show. We haven't really done that. And I haven't done a good job of letting you know about that. So again, I want to let you know if we ever have a guest and I promote this person's coming on the show and you want to ask them a question, would love to ask your questions. So you can be a part of that. Of course, the Friday fan feedback show again coming up this Friday, and we want your questions for that as well. Maybe just to differentiate those, make sure you let me know somewhere in the title or early on in your email. This is a question for the guest. The email address lockedoneddie@gmail.com. And we talked about social media. We would love you to stay interactive with us on social media, X, Twitter, Instagram. We are at Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you, as always, for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great rest of your day. We will talk to you on Wednesday. And as always, go Kings, go.